Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Millionaire invites her black employee's son to play chess for fun. Without knowing he's a genius. In the upscale suburb of Ravenswood, a wealthy neighborhood where the streets were lined with century-old trees and where the houses shone resplendent in the sun's rays, stood the sumptuous villa of the Harrington. This gigantic mansion, surrounded by manicured gardens and sculpted hedges, seemed to have come straight out of a tale of wealth and power. The Harringtons were a billionaire family, owners of a financial empire that extended far beyond New York City, with interests in real estate, the stock market, and elite philanthropy. At the head of this domain reigned Evelyn Harrington, a woman in her 50s, with a haughty bearing and a piercing gaze. Her face, marked by a few expression lines, reflected a life of discipline and uncompromising ambition. Evelyn was both admired and feared in her social circle, known for her charisma but also for her tough temperament and obvious arrogance. In her world, where the elite dictated the rules, compromise was rare, and the slightest weakness was severely punished. For over 10 years, Evelyn employed an exceptional woman as a housekeeper, Angela Johnson. Angela was an African-American woman from Mississippi, a woman of strong character and gentleness in her gaze. She had left her home state, taking with her a simple but powerful dream, to offer her only son a better life, far from the violence and inequality she had known. At Ravenswood, Angela worked tirelessly, taking on every task with exemplary professionalism and discretion. She faced the sometimes disparaging looks or silent judgments of certain members of high society on a daily basis, but she never let bitterness show. Her dignity, patience, and resilience had become her most precious strength. Angela was also a caring mother. Every morning, before starting her long day, she made sure that her son Jamal Johnson would get him ready for school, prepare a balanced breakfast, and tenderly remind him that his intelligence and worth far surpassed the world's prejudices. 15-year-old Jamal was a boy who was both calm and collected. His quiet face, framed by carefully styled curls, concealed a brilliant mind and a secret passion. His dark eyes shone with a rare intelligence, an inner flame fueled by hours of reading and reflection. But what made Jamal truly exceptional was his genius at chess. From a young age, he had developed an extraordinary talent, capable of rivaling the best adult players. He understood the game not just as a competition, but as an art, a strategic dance where every move could be decisive. Yet, at the very exclusive private high school he attended, a predominantly white school surrounded by students from influential families, Jamal carefully hid his gift. He had learned to temper his displays of talent to avoid jealousy, covert discrimination, or humiliation. In an environment where skin color and social background could carry significant weight, Jamal moved forward cautiously, preferring to remain in the shadows rather than provoke hostile glances. Yet, in the privacy of his room, he practiced for hours, devouring chess books, analyzing the games of the grandmasters, dreaming of one day being able to show the world what he was capable of, not just for himself, but also for his mother, for all those who had had to fight to make their mark. That Friday afternoon, under a clear, bright sky, the Harrington mansion was buzzing with unusual activity. Evelyn had decided to host a private reception, a small gathering of her most influential friends, major figures in business, finance, and New York high society. Every detail of the event had been carefully planned to reflect its prestige. Waiters in elegantly dressed black and white uniforms circulated silently among the guests, carrying silver trays filled with glasses of golden-tinted champagne. The murmur of conversation focused on the latest stock market trends, real estate acquisitions, and economic outlooks, creating an atmosphere both subdued and worldly. Amidst this lavish scene, Angela Johnson strove to fulfill her mission with the discretion of a guardian angel. Silent but attentive, she poured champagne and ensured everything was perfect. Her gaze met that of her son Jamal, who was sitting nearby, his expression grim, trying to fade into the background like a discreet shadow. Jamal knew that these kinds of evenings weren't for him, that his world lay elsewhere, in the high school library, or in front of a worn chessboard. Suddenly, in the course of a conversation, Evelyn, sporting a mocking smile and a glint of mischief in her eyes, spoke with that touch of condescension that was characteristic of her. "You know what?" she called to her guests, her clear voice rising above the din, let's invite Angela's son to show us his chess skills. It'll be fun to see how a working-class boy plays against real connoisseurs." An awkward silence followed his words. Angela, who had just poured champagne into a flute, felt a slight shiver run down her spine. Her smile froze for a moment, embarrassment mingling with suppressed anger. Jamal, meanwhile, looked down, staring at his shoes as if trying to make himself invisible. He felt the heavy weight of this invitation, an invitation disguised as a challenge, a staged act meant to demean him. Evelyn, without losing her smile, approached Jamal and said to him, with a false gentleness imbued with authority, "Jamal, my dear, why don't you go show off your talent? Don't be shy. We're all eager to see what you can do." There was in his voice that nuance of provocation, subtle but obvious, which sounded like a challenge thrown out into the open. Jamal felt his heart pound a little faster. He hesitated, torn between the urge to run away and the determination not to let his mother or himself be humiliated. After a moment of suspense, he took a deep breath and slowly straightened up. "Okay," he replied calmly, his voice firmer than he expected. He stood up, his gaze fixed, and followed the guests to Evelyn's games room. This almost solemn room was adorned with dark wood paneling, its walls covered with old master paintings and glittering trophies. In the center sat a huge black and white marble chessboard, topped with intricately carved pieces, ready to be moved. Evelyn sat down opposite him, her smile widening with visible smugness. Around them, the guests crowded around them, some murmuring under their breath, others stifling barely concealed laughter, convinced that the game would be a spectacle without any stakes. But beneath the mocking facade, Jamal felt a new energy, a silent flame that told him this confrontation would be very different from what everyone had imagined. Silence fell over the room, interrupted only by the soft clink of a glass on a low table. All eyes were on the marble chessboard, where fate had placed a black teenager facing an immensely wealthy white woman in a silent battle with stakes far greater than a mere game. Jamal, without trembling, moved his king's pawn forward 2 squares. 1, e4. And King's Gambit. The connoisseurs in the room exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't an opening for the faint-hearted. Offering up a pawn on the first few moves was risky, reckless for some, brilliant for others. But Jamal knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't playing to be safe. He was playing to win. He was playing to make his point. Evelyn, opposite, arched an eyebrow. She had learned chess in her youth at Yale University, with private teachers and clubs reserved for the elite. Her style was solid, conservative. She preferred safe lines, closed positions where she could dictate the tempo. But there she was already on the defensive. She responded by declining the gambit. 1, e5 2. f4 x4. Jamal continued calmly, developing his pieces with surgical precision. Knight on f3, bishop on c4. He threatened, he prepared, he built an invisible trap with an almost unsettling calm. Evelyn, initially confident, began to feel uneasy. Her hands, still perfectly manicured, trembled slightly as she grasped her date. She tried to maintain the illusion of control, but the truth was there, obvious to anyone who knew how to look. She didn't understand what this boy was building. With every blow, Jamal seemed to anticipate her intentions. He was reacting not only to what she was doing, but to what she was going to do. He read his game. He was readinging her. The atmosphere in the room changed. The guests, initially amused, began to lean forward, intrigued. The stifled laughter disappeared, replaced by growing tension. One could almost hear the soft scraping of shoes on the polished parquet floor, or the faint heave of paused breaths. After about 20 minutes, Evelyn's situation was becoming critical. Her poorly protected king was exposed to a network of attacks she hadn't seen coming. Her queen was offside, her knights poorly positioned. She stared at the board with eyes that betrayed panic. Then, with a sure hand, Jamal played knight on g5. A direct threat. A double attack. In one move, Evelyn knew she was going to lose a rook, or suffer a terrible check. She froze, frozen. The murmurs rose. It's not possible. A guest whispered, barely audible. Evelyn looked up at Jamal. His gaze, once arrogant, had changed. It was now clouded by incomprehension mixed with astonishment. How can you be so good?" she finally asked, her voice a little broken, unable to hide her astonishment. Jamal raised his head. He wasn't looking for humiliation. He wasn't gloating. His voice, when it rose, was calm, measured, almost tender. "I started learning very young." He paused slightly. "My grandfather played games with me every night when I was 6. Then I read books, studied the grandmasters, and played online, hundreds of times." He looked at the chessboard, as if he saw not a victory, but a lesson. "This game taught me to think beyond the box. To not rush into things. To see beyond appearances." Evelyn felt a burning sensation in her throat. This boy, the one she had wanted to ridicule, had just given her a lesson in elegance, intelligence, and humanity. Around them, the guests didn't know whether to applaud or look away in shame. In less than 20 minutes, the fate of the game was sealed. Jamal, with a confidence that contrasted with his youth, played his final shot, a movement that was both simple and relentless, queen on h5. Checkmate. The king of Evelyn, cornered and surrounded, could no longer escape the sentence. The few pieces he had left could do nothing against the elegant brutality of this maneuver. A deafening silence fell over the room. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. All the guests stared at the chessboard, frozen, incredulous. This wasn't just a defeat. It was a demonstration. A silent symphony played by a boy most of them hadn't even noticed when they entered. Evelyn, however, stood there, motionless, staring at the marble top. Her fingers trembled slightly, brushing against a piece that would no longer be of any use. Her lips parted, but no sound came out for several seconds. Finally, in a hoarse, almost childlike whisper, she whispered, "You have won." But it wasn't just the game he'd won. It was a bigger fight. An older one. One of contemptuous stares, silent judgments, disguised humiliations. Jamal hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't protested. He had simply plays, and in this gesture, he had overturned arrogance with the grace of genius. In a corner of the room, Angela, who had remained upright, professional, almost invisible until then, felt something rise within her. A warm wave. A breath of justice. A deep emotion, knotted between pride, gratitude, and years of silence endured. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. She simply met the gaze of her son, who, without saying a word, understood her. Everything was there, between them. One of the guests, a businessman named Richard Templeton, cleared his throat. The man, usually sarcastic and distant, was visibly shaken. He approached Jamal, looking at him with a mixture of respect and humility. "You're truly a genius, Jamal. I've never seen anyone play with such clarity and calm at your age." Others nodded. Some, who had been mocking him until then, lowered their eyes, uncomfortable. They had been wrong. All of them. They had judged him, like Evelyn, not on his skills, but on his appearance, on his origins, on what he represented in their eyes. Evelyn, still seated, bowed her head. She, the queen of this house, the woman who dictated the rules, suddenly found herself stripped of authority. For the first time in a long time, she was no longer in control of the narrative. A truth exploded in her face. She had underestimated a young man, not for who he was, but for who he was, where he came from. And this truth burned her. She finally looked up at Jamal. He wasn't looking at her with triumph, nor with hatred. He didn't need to beat her any further. His calmness was an answer in itself. His dignity was a victory. Angela stepped forward then, gently placing a hand on her son's shoulder. And in that simple gesture, it all said, the transmission, the love, the silent strength of mothers who raise kings in the shadows. That day, in a room decorated with gold and power, it was a 15-year-old black boy, modest, quiet, but brilliant, who redefined greatness. The days following that unforgettable afternoon at the Harrington Villa were marked by a subtle, but real, change. Evelyn Harrington, a woman hitherto known for her pride and icy distance, began to adopt a different attitude. There were no public apologies or grandiloquent declarations. No. For her, change took the form of discreet but significant gestures. She began by summoning Angela in his office, not to give him orders, but to listen to him. For the first time since she'd hired her, Evelyn offered her a cup of tea and invited her to sit down, breaking down the invisible wall between mistress and employee. It was a strange, almost surreal moment for Angela. But she understood, something had been touched in Evelyn, cracked perhaps. And most importantly, Evelyn grew closer to Jamal. She offered, sincerely this time, to finance it for him. Private lessons with an international chess master, Master Andrei Volkov, a former Soviet champion living in New York. Jamal accepted, not out of gratitude to Evelyn, but because he felt his time had come. The time to stop hiding, to stop diminishing himself. With Volkov, Jamal discovered a new dimension of playing, more rigorous, more technical, but also more creative. The old master, austere at first, was quickly won over by his students' intuitive intelligence and profound calm. He often said, "This boy doesn't just play with his head. He plays with his soul." Freed from the shackles of anonymity, Jamal threw himself into competition. He first participated in a regional tournament, then to a state championship, where he faced young prodigies from all over the country. The media began to talk about him. The Black Mozart of chess headlined a specialist blog. "Intelligence has no color," wrote a local newspaper. In every tournament, Jamal played with rare elegance. He didn't just win, he inspired young people in his Brooklyn neighborhood began watching his matches streamed online. Schools invited him to speak to students. A movement grew around him. And meanwhile, Angela, his mother, remained in the shadows, as always. But her smile had changed. It was wider, brighter. She knew that Jamal carried much more than talent within him. He was a living message, proof that intelligence, discipline and patience could break down the thickest walls. Evelyn, too, was changing. Slowly. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, but a painful one. She began to question what she thought she knew about others. She hired a new, more diverse staff, created a scholarship in her late husband's name for talented young people from modest backgrounds, and most importantly, she never again dared to treat Angela as a mere subordinate. One day she confided to a close friend, in an almost guilty whisper, "I thought that wealth gave the power to value everything. But this boy showed me that greatness lies neither in money nor in titles, but in the depth of the mind." Jamal's story became a source of inspiration far beyond Ravenswood. Articles, reports, and even a documentary were published. Young people from disadvantaged backgrounds identified with him. Schools, once indifferent, opened free chess clubs for inner-city children. And in the midst of it all, Jamal, always calm, always humble, kept moving forward. He wasn't hungry for fame. He simply wanted play, learn, and inspire. One evening, returning home from a national tournament he had just won, Jamal found Angela in their small apartment, far from the Harringtons' luxury. He placed his medal on the table and said to her with a smile, "It's as much yours as it is mine." Angela looked at him for a long time, her eyes misty, then replied, "No, my son. That one, you won it with your heart. I just showed you how to listen." This story is not just about a brilliant boy and his silent revenge. It is a group lesson. A brutal but beautiful reminder that judging a person on their skin color, profession, or neighborhood, is to miss out on entire worlds of talent, beauty, and strength. 15-year-old Jamal Johnson wasn't just a prodigy. He was a shining light. Living proof that greatness knows no social status or skin color. It reveals itself to those who have the courage to believe in it, despite everything.